If you got a Bible, go to Ezra. Ezra is one of those table of contents books, so no shame in your game if you need a table of contents to find the book of Ezra. Or if you're on a device, you just click it, type it, whatever you got to do to find it. As you get there, just want to say welcome, want to say good morning to you. If you're a guest with us, as a guest at a church is a weird thing, right? Like you walk in, you don't know if they're gonna make you do something awkward, like stand up and like do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around. So like, we're not gonna do that to you, but we do wanna know you. And so we have what we call our connect cards, and those are just a quick opportunity for you to give your name, your email, a quick contact number. We'd love to follow up. We'd love for you to be more than a face in a crowd, or maybe even somebody that we didn't get to encounter. And so we'd love to connect with you. And in fact, if we haven't met, my name's Mike, and I'm glad that you're here. As you turn to the book of Ezra, the other day, I was thinking about this story that has actually been really pivotal for me in my life. And the reality of it is, I love basketball, but my sport that I was actually decent at was track. And so anytime I hear a good track story, I'm like, oh yeah, right? Like, and so in 1968, the Olympics were in Mexico City. Now, the Mexico City Olympics are famous for a few things. If you are really into track and field, for a long-standing long jump record was set in 1968 at those Olympics. Those Olympics are famous because at the time, the best basketball player in the world was a man named Lew Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he actually protested, boycotted going to those games because of racial injustice in America. And then on top of that, there were two long jumpers, or I think high jumpers, I believe, that famous for wearing black gloves and throwing up their fist in protest of what was going on in the world on the medal stand at the 1968 Olympics. Like 1968 Olympics had a whole bunch of sub-stories that were going on in that thing. But the story that maybe you've not heard about, or maybe it wasn't as meaningful for you, is the story of about a man named John Stephen Okwara. John Stephen Okwara was a marathon runner from the country of Tanzania. And when he set out to begin to run the race, as he was running, because of the change in elevation from Tanzania to Mexico City, they suspect that it started causing cramping in his body. And as he started cramping, he fell over, gashed open his knee, dislocated his knee, hurt his shoulder, and then gets up and continues to run. He finishes the race an hour after the winner finished the race. So the winner has iced down, rehydrated, is living it up in Olympic Village at that point. And John still hasn't finished the race. And so John finally gets in, runs that lonely lap of the stadium with only a few hundred people seeing him finish the race. And when he gets done, like the people who were covering it were so shocked that this guy finished the race that they went and interviewed. Like you don't get interviews when you're last place. They tell you to turn the light off if you're an hour late in most situations. But like he comes in and they put a microphone in his face and they say, Mr. Okwara, you had no chance of winning this race. You were obviously hobbled, limping, bandage falling off your leg. What is it that caused you to do this? And he said, my country didn't send me 5,000 miles to start a race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish one. And so like this is such a big story. If you go to Olympics.com, like this is one of the stories of the power of the human spirit that they put on there to kind of motivate people. Hey, you can do the thing even if it's difficult. And so if I was going to encapsulate Mr. Okwara's story in a short statement, it would be, it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish. But the reason I'm pointing that out to you this morning is not because I want to motivate you to run a marathon. In fact, unless somebody's chasing you, there's no point in running that far. The reason I want to tell you the story is because that story would be much less compelling if it had different circumstances. So if John Stephen Okwara was running and he ends up being an hour behind the first place finisher, and they put a microphone in his face and they said, Mr. Okwara, what caused you to continue to run? He's like, man, I just took a wrong turn at mile 2. Nobody cares about that story. And so the reason I say that to you is because I think the statement is right. It does not matter how you start, but it certainly matters where you start. And so I want to spend some time as we walk through Ezra this morning thinking about what is our starting point as we stand before the Lord. We've been for nearly 6 weeks in this series, Ruins and Renewal. And the reality is, in a room of this size, in fact, the reality is if you put two people in a room, somebody's going through something. And sometimes we have felt the weight of life being so chaotic and broken and seemingly unmanageable that it feels like everything is in ruins. And so the journey that we've been on as a people is, if that's true, if we've experienced that, even if we back up to COVID and we think about the last 5 years and the world not being what we want it to be, or the things that we've lost or are trying to reorient to, like this idea of ruins can feel very real, but the promise of God is that there's renewal for those that have been in ruin. And so what we've been doing is we've just been walking through these 3 books of the Bible that go together, Ezra, Haggai, and Nehemiah, that tell the story of the people of God coming back from the most, basically the most devastating moment in their history, trying to rebuild out of the ruins into a renewal as a people, both as individuals and corporately. And so we've walked through the book of Haggai, and then we're in the early part of the book of Ezra. And last week we just spent some time, one, seeing the king of Persia sending these people back at home from exile, and then 2, just the list of names of the people and their families that were courageous enough to say, okay, we'll leave what's familiar to enter into what is going to be difficult. And I left you last week with 2 ideas, and here's the first. Expect opposition. In trying to experience the renewal that God has for you, it will not be Candyland and Care Bears. If you're a certain age, Care Bears was this cartoon in the 80s that was really, really weird, where they had these bears that had these logos on their stomach, and if something was going wrong in the world, they'd be like, Care Bear stare, and it would make things better. And I don't know why it made sense when I was a kid, because as I say that out loud, I feel like I'm tripping on something. And so, all that to say, that's not what the Lord's doing. You are going to have to face some opposition. Here's the second thing I left you with last week. Oppose your expectations. Not only are there going to be difficult things ahead, but what the Lord is doing may not look like what you expect it to look like, and it may not look like what you want it to look like. He is not taking straw polls and saying, how do you think I should redeem you? He's doing it in the way that he sees fit. And so as we jump into Ezra chapter 3 this morning, I just want to give you a pattern to see the text through. And so here's the pattern. First step. The leaders start an initiative in alignment with their tradition. And so we're going to see these names on repeat, Jeshua and Zerubbabel, and they are the priests, the religious leader, and Zerubbabel, the governor, the political leader, and they're going to come together, and they're going to be making decisions according to their tradition. Hey, we need to do this thing next. And then the second step in the pattern is there's going to be opposition or an unmet expectation that arises. So watch for that. And out of that is going to come the third step, a decision that needs to be made. Will we lean into resolve, or will we retreat? Let me pray. And so Jesus, I realize that a story about people rebuilding their religious traditions 2,500 years ago probably doesn't feel very applicable to us today. And so I confess what we sang earlier, that Lord, I need you. That it will not be my intellect or my ability to turn a phrase or the amount that I studied this week that'll make this come alive for people, that it'll actually be your spirit dwelling amongst us and helping to bring to light, maybe even things that I don't say, but yet that you want to show us that you want to do work in. And so, Lord, I just trust you for renewal for us individually, corporately, through your word. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Ezra chapter 3, starting in verse 1, says this. When the 7th month arrived and the Israelites were in their towns, the people gathered as one in Jerusalem. Jeshua, son of Jozadak, and his brothers the priests, along with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his brothers, began to build the altar of Israel's God in order to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. They set up the altar on its foundations and offered burnt offerings for morning and evening on it to the Lord, even though they feared the surrounding peoples. They celebrated the Feast of Shelters as prescribed and offered burnt offerings each day and based on the number specified by the ordinance for each festival day. After that, they offered the regular burnt offering and the offerings for the beginning of each month, and for all the Lord's appointed holy occasions, as well as the freewill offerings brought to the Lord. On the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, even though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. They gave money to the stonecutters and artisans and gave food and drink and all to the people of Sidon and Tyre. So they would bring cedar wood from Lebanon to Joppa by the sea, according to the authorization given them by King Cyrus of Persia. So as we jump into this, we've talked about this earlier. A few weeks back, we were in the book of Haggai, and we talked about the significance of the seventh month in their culture. And the seventh month was full of holidays. The first holiday of the seventh month was the Feast of Trumpets. And the Feast of Trumpets was meant to be this moment of where they came and made sacrifice, and they were supposed to be reminded of their freedom. And so they would set off the occasion with the sound of trumpets. And so it was the Feast of Trumpets. Or 10 days later, they had what is the Day of Atonement. Maybe you see it on your modern calendar as Yom Kippur, but this was the day that the high priest would go into God's presence and he would make atonement. He would make an offering for all the sins of the people throughout that year. Or just a few days after that, on the 15th, what we see in the text is this feast of booths or tents or shelters or ingathering. It was meant to remind the people of God bringing them, taking care of them while they're in the middle of the wilderness. And so all of this, as you begin to read, like this is a significantly holy time for them as a people. The calendar just rolls onto these days. And as the calendar rolls onto these days, they recognize that they can't obey the Lord in doing the things in worship that they're supposed to do if they don't build the altar that they need to build. And so we see these leaders. Verse 2 will tell us that Jeshua and Zerubbabel, these are the two names we saw in Haggai that will show up 15 years later when the work doesn't get done, that they as leaders, they say, we need to build this. So they start this project. They begin to build this altar, and they begin to build it on the foundations of the altar that was previously there before it was ruined during the period of exile by Babylon. Like they're rebuilding their history, rebuilding their tradition, rebuilding their past. They're going back to where they've been before. And then we said that the pattern goes from leaders taking initiative to then they face some level of opposition. And you may have missed it when we were reading it all together, but I want you to catch it in verse 3. And so here's what it says. They set up the altar on its foundations and offered burnt offerings for the morning and evening on it to the Lord, even though they feared the surrounding peoples. Or let me say it to you a different way, maybe it's translated in a different text, that they were intimidated by the people that were around them. Now you have to recognize that what they're doing is very exclusive. Like they're not setting up, hey, here's how we would worship the Persian gods and here's how we would worship these other gods. They're saying that the God that we worship, Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth, the God that has called us his people, that we're worshiping him exclusively, and we're setting up an area and we're setting up a pattern of behavior that the world around us is going to know what we're doing and going to know that we reject what they hold. And so of course, others are watching and looking and saying, wait a minute. Are you saying what I feel is not true? Are you saying what I think is not right? Like now there's a pressure here of what's going on because they're openly saying this is where our allegiance lies, and that flies in the face of the people around them. They face opposition. So now they have to make a decision. And what we see through the rest of this text is that they enter in full force to finishing the altar and doing what the altar does. And so they begin to describe. And so that specific opportunity of the Feast of Booths, I ran over it quickly before, but I want to take a little bit more time. So that feast, here's what they would do. For 7 days, they would begin to do this practice of sacrificing bulls and lambs and a goat for sin offering. And it was a descending number. So like on day 1, they would sacrifice 13 bulls. And then on day 2, they would sacrifice 12 bulls. And on day 3, 11, and so on. And it was this pattern all the way down to the 8th day, where the 8th day was this massive ceremony of celebration. And then they would do a normal sacrifice of what they would do at the start of every month. And so it's just this kind of specifically extra holy season for them to celebrate what God was doing. That as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, that he kept providing for them and kept keeping his promises and showing that he was faithful, that he would bring them from far away back home. And so this moment to say to all the people around them that we're celebrating that the God who was faithful before when we were wandering is the same God now that's been faithful while we were wandering and brought us back home. It was a moment. They're having this important worship moment that links them to their history. And the more you read, the more you realize there are all these historical links that they're pulling to. It's already told you they were building on the foundations that already exist. They're doing the worship traditions that were prescribed to them back in the day of Moses. They hired people from Sidon and Tyre That might not mean much to you, but if you went and read back the beginning of the building of the first temple, Solomon paid money to people from Sidon and Tyre to build the temple. And so they're even like, hey, we're getting the same materials that we started with. We're trying to repeat our history. And I love that. I think that's awesome. But you know what I also think? If you got people that are trying to intimidate you, you don't need hymn books. You need weapons. Like if you are a country of people or a city of people who don't have a wall to protect you, and that was one of your best defensive mechanisms, that maybe before you build an altar, you build a wall. That seems to, logically, that's what I'm doing. Like, I guess in our day and age, I'm figuring out what satellite we need to create a force field in case something's coming before I'm like, hey, worship team, can you lead us in another one? Like if we're really feeling that kind of pressure from the world around us, this doesn't seem to be the wisest option. And yet something in them said that the starting point for us in asking the Lord to redeem and renew and revive our world is not us self-defending and building ourselves up. It's for us to say that we're putting our attention on you and we're worshiping you. And so I wrote it this way. The centrality of worship cannot be diminished. Worship is the defiant announcement that our lives will not be ruled by the troubling circumstances that we see. Like this is not an optional thing. Like I know in our culture, like being a man, right? Like dudes don't tend to like to sing out, kind of do their thing, hand in pocket, like, "Hey, Lord, I need you." Whisper to your brother, try to drop it a few out. "Lord, I need you," right? Like say it as manly as you possibly can, because we don't tend to do that, like to worship something, to put our arms up like a child trying to be picked up by our Father, that like we've grown past that. We should be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We should be strong enough and mature enough and resourceful enough and smart enough. And so worship feels like, yeah, I know it's a thing that we do, but like do we got to do that thing? I think we have a reduced understanding of worship, first of all, that it's not just the musical portion of a service, but also I think there's something in us, and I said men, but I think there's times, even women, where there's this sense of, I like that song or I don't like that song. This speaks to my circumstances or it doesn't speak to my circumstances. This makes sense for me and I feel comfortable with it or I don't feel comfortable with it. I think that's just true of the human condition, man or woman, that sometimes we evaluate worship like, but if it's not practical and doesn't give me steps to how to, like, don't let me sing, "Lord, I need you." Give me 3 steps of how to deal with my coworker that gets on my nerves. And so I think it's important that we see that worship is not just this optional thing, but what we're seeing in Ezra is that these people see it as central to the effort of God renewing something. That to look to God as being the center and exalt him as center and sing about him as center, that there's something about that says, hey, it's not going to be my efforts. It's not going to be my intellect. It's not going to be my power. It's going to be you and your grace showing up and doing something that I cannot do for myself. And even that last sentence, you've actually heard me say that last sentence before. It actually comes out of my favorite message that I've ever preached, which is out of Revelation chapter 5. And I'm not going to re-preach that message today. But there's this realization when you see the picture of eternity, that worship is this defying announcement that come what may, I'm not evaluating the world just by the mess that I see. I evaluate the world by the King who stands above it all. And then the text keeps going. I mentioned to you that there's a pattern. Look for it as we read. In the 2nd month of the year after they arrived at God's house in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, son of Jozadak, and the rest of the brothers, including the priests, the Levites, and all who returned to Jerusalem from the captivity, began to build. They appointed the Levites, who were 20 years old or more, to supervise the work of the Lord's house. Jeshua with his sons and brothers, Kadmiel with his sons, and the sons of Judah and of Henadad, with their sons and brothers, the Levites, joined together to supervise those working on the house of God. When the builders had laid the foundation of the Lord's temple, the priests dressed in their robes and holding trumpets, and the Levites descended from Asaph, holding cymbals, took their position to praise the Lord as King David and Israel had instructed. They sang with praise and thanksgiving to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love to Israel endures forever. Then all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the Lord's house had been laid. But many of the older priests, Levites, and family heads who had seen the first temple wept loudly when they saw the foundation of this temple. But many others shouted joyfully. The people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shouting from that of the weeping, because the people were shouting so loudly, and the sound was heard far away. Now, again, I told you there's a pattern, so just let me highlight it really quickly for you. Jeshua and Zerubbabel, names highlighted again, now start the next part of the initiative. They're laying the foundation of this temple. They're doing historical things, and so they're putting it in the same location that it happened before. They have the sons of Asaph, who David back in the day said, hey, your job is on these high occasions of national observance of the goodness of God that you are going to lead us in worship. And they have the exact same group of people, the descendants of that same group of people leading again. They're being wise to kind of repeat their history. The Levites were commissioned back in the day to oversee the work, and the Levites are being commissioned again to oversee the work. All of that's happening. And then even the verse 11, they sing a significant song. That small lyric of, for he is good and his faithful love to Israel endures forever. They didn't make that up on the spot. And it's actually this refrain all throughout the history of particularly the building of a place for God and hosting God's presence that they would sing over and over again. And so if you jumped in your Bible and you went to 1 Chronicles chapter 16, there's this moment where David brings this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant was meant to represent God's presence with his people. And because of their unfaithfulness, they had lost it in battle. And the Philistines in particular had it. And over again, when people would steal it, bad things would happen to them. And so eventually they're like, hey, can y'all take this back? We don't want this. And so David gets it back and he brings it into the city and they bring it into Jerusalem. And it's that as that's happening, the worship leaders begin to sing. And there's this long song in 1 Chronicles 16, but towards the end, it says these words that he is good, the Lord is good, and his faithfulness, though we've been unfaithful, his faithful love has endured for us forever. Or David's son Solomon, when he's commissioning the opening of the temple of the Lord, that the people that are the tribe of Asaph or the group of Asaph, that they would begin to sing this song, for the Lord is good and his faithfulness endures forever. Or just a couple of chapters later, when they set out all the sacrifices to actually start the worship service and honor the Lord, and fire comes down from heaven and nobody can walk in the room because the presence of the Lord is so real, that they say, because the Lord is good and his faithfulness endures forever. And so every time they feel like they're having this moment of God's presence showing up amongst his people, their refrain is to sing, hey, we know that he's good, and this is how we know, because he's shown up amongst us and he's been faithful to us forever. Except for verse 12. Verse 12 is one of those things that it's like, you could have left that part out. I thought the credits were about to roll on this Lifetime movie, and all of a sudden somebody in the background starts crying and wailing and saying, hey, this isn't what it used to be. Read verse 12 with me. It says, but many of the older priests, Levites, and family heads who had seen the first temple wept loudly when they saw the foundation of this temple. We know in Haggai that they looked at it and they said, this doesn't compare to what it used to be. But also they're singing the song of God's presence showing up, this song of God doing miraculous things as they're staring at all this rubble around them as they're trying to do a cleanup project. It didn't feel like God's presence was there for them. And they say the quiet part out loud. Like there are some times in life where it's completely inappropriate for you to say the things that you're thinking. So for instance, if you are going to somebody's child's birthday party or their kind of baby shower or something like that, and you're standing there and you're like, you know, the infant mortality rate's been going up over the last 5 years. Nah, buddy, it's not time to say that. You don't go to your friend's wedding and be like, you know, 50% of marriages end in divorce. Like, you probably shouldn't do that. You shouldn't show up at somebody's funeral in your favorite party gear, right? Like there's some things that are out of sync with the moment that's happening. But it's interesting because there's nobody that says that what they're doing is wrong in this text. Nobody says that these people who have seen God move in a particular way before, that are wrestling with the fact that it's not the same, nobody says, hey, you're violating worship. In fact, it's such a mixed sound that the people around them can't tell the difference. that other people who are hearing it, that there's something going on. There's this not meeting of expectations that's happening, and the Lord doesn't come down and be like, hey, I'm gonna need you to move over there and go cry in the corner. They talk about me right now. That doesn't happen. That he allows them, even with their disappointment and their doubt, to be a part of what's happening in that moment. And it's mixed together as if to say, there's something about the broadness of the shoulders of God that he can handle both your praise and your lament. That he can handle both your delight and your doubt. That he can take on both your concern and also your calls to him of praise. Like, there's something about God that he's not scared about the honesty of where you are. And so I wrote it this way. Our worship must embrace the whole reality of our experience. Delight and disappointment have a place among the people of God. Can I just say to you, like, whichever side of the spectrum that you are on, like there's space for you here. Yeah. Like, if you walked in this morning, extra pep in your step, they gave you a couple of extra shots in your Starbucks coffee this morning that you didn't even ask for, and so you're both awake and happy. That's the Lord's kindness to you. Enjoy that. But if you're in this place where you're like, you couldn't be more right about where I'm at with this idea of ruins of what's going on in my life. It took everything that I had to get here. And so you guys are singing about trust in God, but I'm struggling to do that right now. Nobody's standing there looking at you like, could you pep it up a little bit? That somehow there's space for both. But I don't want to lie and say that that's not a challenge either. So I told you there's a pattern in the text, and they've got to make a decision whether they resolve or whether they retreat, and you'll find out what they do next week. But what do we do with that? I told you before, it doesn't matter how you start, but it does matter where. And so I think us building altars in the right place really matters. I said it before, but I'll say it again. A story about 2,500 years ago and people building an altar probably doesn't hit you where you desire, but there's something about what an altar represented, the level of worship and connection and intimacy with God. Like, I think that is actually vitally important for you and for me. So I wrote it this way. Our tendency is to fight tooth and nail for the throne of our hearts. That's the wrong starting place. Renewal begins on the altar of our hearts. I think for you and for me, the way that we often think about the world is that if the world is going to be different, that we need to either be more influential or more powerful or more notable. Man, if I could just change society around me, my kids wouldn't struggle like they're struggling. If I had more agency, if I was able to shift this thing, or if I could influence the people around me more, it would make more of a difference. All of that is throne language. The throne of your heart is occupied by Jesus. He doesn't need you to take his seat. But there's an altar that you're called to. In fact, Paul in the book of Romans would talk about it this way. And so he's spent 11 chapters of this church of divided people, historically Jewish and historically Gentile, and fighting over who is at the center of this church and who's supposed to be kind of the culture makers of the church. And his answer to that is, ain't none of y'all righteous, not one of you. Every single one of you are desperately in need of the work of Jesus. So he spends 11 chapters talking through that, talking about that the Lord is doing something in Israel so that he could draw in Gentiles, and now he's doing something in Gentiles so he can draw in Israel. He's doing all of that work. And then chapter 12, he says, therefore, as if to say, I spent all that time telling you that, to now let's make it real practical for you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Let me paraphrase Paul. The seat that's been left for you is not for you to crawl up on the seat of your life and rule and control and lead by your expectations. The seat that's been left open for you is to crawl up on the altar and lay there like you are the sacrifice that God wants. He wants to transform our hearts before he transforms anything else around us. This week, as I was preparing, I stumbled on some work by a man of the name of Duncan Campbell. Duncan Campbell was a Scottish evangelist in the mid-1900s. And he was part of a revival, either called the Lewis Awakening or the Hebridean Revival, on these islands that are just west of Scotland. He will tell you, and here's the thing, this started in 1949. So that's less than 80 years ago. Like my parents were alive when this was going on. Like some of you in this room were alive when this was going on. So it's not like he could just make a bunch of stuff up and people are like, oh, we can't verify it. It was AD 1000. Like there are people alive today who knew what happened. And so Duncan tells the story of something like 20,000 people in the span of like 4 years coming to faith. He says that 75% of those people actually came to having a relationship with Jesus before they ever stepped into the door of a church. So let me tell you how it started. There were these two elderly ladies, Peggy and Christine Smith. Peggy was 84 years old and blind. Christine was so addled with arthritis that she was bent over and couldn't walk. And so they could no longer come to church. And so they just prayed in their living room. Now, if you're thinking about influential power brokers in a culture, they're not it. And so Peggy and Christine are praying, and the dramatic irony of God gives Peggy, the blind lady, a vision. She has a vision of the churches of her past, the past generations, all of a sudden being full of young people, being led by a minister that they don't personally know. So Peggy calls the local pastor, and the local pastor knows about Peggy and Christine. And so he shows up at the house, and she says, I think this is the vision the Lord's given me. You should do something about it. And he was like, what do we do? They were like, you should start a prayer meeting on Tuesday and Friday nights. And you should go pray in a barn, and we'll pray here in the house because we can't join you. So they begin to do that. And for 6 weeks, they are praying twice a week in the barn and in the house. And nothing happens. And during that 6th week, a young man that's amongst them jumps up, grabs his Bible, and reads these words out of Psalm 24. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not appealed to what is false and who has not sworn deceitfully. He closes his Bible and he turns to everybody in the room. And the way that Campbell talks about it, he's like, he apologizes for the crude language. And so some of you are like, what are you about to say? It's not as juicy as you think it is. He says, it seems to me to be so much humbug. That's the word that he was worried about. To be praying as we are to pray, to be waiting as we are waiting, if we ourselves are not rightly related to God. And so maybe let me update the reference. Hey, y'all, for us to pray this way and wait this way, this kind of feels like some BS if we're not going to spend some time getting ourselves right with the Lord. And then he prays this. God, are my hands clean? Is my heart pure? And then he falls out in the middle of the floor. And from there, what begins to happen is there's this like awakening amongst people. They say the next day, there are multiple people trying to figure out what's going on. People are not going to work, not doing what they normally do. Like I want you to hear what's happening at this moment. It wasn't that this mass of people figured it out and started doing a thing together. It was that this one individual was willing to say, Lord, before we worry about the altar in our community or the altar in our worship spaces or even the altar in my home, is the altar of my heart right? And when that happened, it began to flow out to other people. As it begins to flow out to other people, Peggy and Christine say, hey, part of the vision was that there was a minister that we didn't know that was going to show up and he was going to lead this. So you should go find a guy. And so the local pastor reaches out to a guy and the guy's like, nah, I'm not going to come do that. You should talk to Duncan Campbell. He's probably available. And so Duncan Campbell is not even the first round draft pick here. He's the guy that they're like, the other guy said he can't do it. Are you available? And Duncan Campbell's like, I'm actually not. I'm actually in the middle of doing some meetings with these churches and I can't get out of it. To which Peggy Smith responded, that is a man's plan, not God's plan. You will be here within 10 days. And Duncan Campbell says in his book back, I got there within 10 days. And so he gets there, and the first night he shows up, and they say, okay, we know it's late. We know you're tired. You've had to travel, but there's some people that want to gather together to worship at 9 p.m. Can you just come in and share a word with them and lead the meeting? And then afterwards, we'll take you home. You'll get to eat dinner. Sorry, we just have to do it this way. Great. He goes in, preaches for like 2 hours. So y'all should feel good because we're only at like the hour mark right now. I got another hour to go. And 300 people in the room. Nothing spectacular happens. He is walking out with a young man that read Psalm 24, and as they're walking down the aisle to go to the door, and I know he's thinking in the back of my mind, what am I going to eat tonight? Where do I get to sleep? The young man stops and turns back towards the front of the church and screams out to God, you cannot fail us. You cannot fail us. You said that you were going to pour yourself out like water on thirsty land and flooding the ground. You cannot fail us. And drops to his knees and begins to pray. And Duncan Campbell's like, all right, well, I'm going home. And is walking out. And as he gets to the door, a man stops him and says, hey, I gotta stop you. There are 600 people headed this way who want to be a part of what God's doing. So let me put this in context. This room is probably close to 300 people. Imagine at the end of this service, we're getting ready to walk out. And as we're walking out, twice as many people are in the parking lot saying, God, would you do something? But then the context of what was happening was that many of these people were at the local dance hall. Modernize the reference. They was up in the club, not thinking about Jesus, not worried about Jesus, listening to their music. And all of a sudden, the Spirit of God begins to move up in the club because the Holy Spirit goes where the Holy Spirit wants to go, shows up, begins to move up in the club. Music stops. People start repenting. They're like, we got to go to church. They show up at church. They go back in. Campbell's like, I'm not getting to go home. And so he goes up to go back and preach. And as he's trying to get back up to preach, he has to step over this woman who's a college student from Aberdeen who's laying on the front of the pulpit, screaming out to God, is there any mercy of God left for me? As they spend until 3 o'clock in the morning, spending time with the Lord, they're finally getting ready to go home. He's on the way home, and a dude stops him and says, hey man, you got to come to the police station. There are 4,000 people or 400 people at the police station. So now you've got 1,000 people who did not hear him preach his first message, that are all of a sudden experiencing this move of God happening individually in their hearts. And he gets to the police station, and there are 4 guys that are sitting on the curb crying out, Lord, is there still mercy for us? Is there still mercy for us? There are people surrounding the police station. I don't know if you know this. Some of you have different past, but you do not choose to hang out at the police station. And yet all these people are hanging out at the police station, repenting of their sins and asking the Lord to move in their day. And that was day 1.
Come on.
And I just want to press on us that it didn't happen because of a slick marketing campaign. I don't think Duncan Campbell was good at social media, particularly because he didn't have it. I don't think they invited the right worship team and everybody's like, oh man, this is about to be banging, we showing up. One dude in the middle of a prayer meeting said, Lord, you've got to start with our hearts and not anything else. Hear me, when I read Ezra and I read and I think about this idea of renewal, I'm not just thinking about it individually, but I'm thinking about it as a church. And it will not be, hey, let's just do the things we used to do. Nor will it be, hey, if we can get in a room and get a whiteboard and figure out the best strategy. It will be, Lord, will you take my heart and see if it's clean? Will you take my hands and make sure that my actions are pure? Like, will you interact and work on the altar of my heart? If you build the altar of my heart, then the altar of my home changes. Then the altar of our church changes. Then the altar of our community changes. Like, you have to start in us, not in our programs or in our buildings. And here's the second thing. There's space for disappointment and doubt in our devotion. I actually think if we're not honest about where we are, you don't get to where that young man got to. Sitting in prayer meetings for 6 weeks and nothing happening is a level of disappointment and doubt that causes you to ask some real questions. I'll confess to you, I don't know if you know that we do this, but periodically our staff will just close the offices and we'll get away and we'll just have a staff prayer day. And the last time that we had one, we were praying before Easter. And the way that we kind of organize the days is we spend some time with the Lord by ourselves, and then we come together and we kind of share what the Lord did amongst us, and then we'll pray specifically around those things, then we'll have lunch, and then we'll end the time praying for the specific thing that's coming up, in this case, Easter. And so we had this staff prayer day, and we were praying, and we were each kind of sharing what the Lord was doing. And it got to me, and like I'm listening to what other people are praying for, and I'm like, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. But the whole time that I was with the Lord by myself, I just kept feeling him asking me the question, are you willing to pay the cost that it would require to experience what you want to experience? And so I shared that among the team. And there was this like deeply holy moment where you got a bunch of preachers in a room, a bunch of ministers in a room. You know what ministers don't do? Confess sin. And we start confessing to one another. Here's where I've been foolish. Here's where I've been arrogant. Here's where I've been hidden. Here's where I've tried to work in my own power. And it was this sliver of this moment, but I'll tell you where it came from. It came from, Lord, I don't want to spend all this time on my Tuesday praying and just walk out of here and you do the same thing that you're going to do anyways. That Sunday looks like the Sunday before and looks like the Sunday that's going to show up after. Like this level of disappointment, I just begin to confess the Lord. And he actually moved in that. I don't think that's just unique to our staff's experience. I think it's a biblical experience. We love Matthew 28:18 because it's the Great Commission. Go into all the world and teach the nations. Have you ever read Matthew 28:16 and 17? It says that the 11 went out to the mountain to wait for Jesus. And when he showed up, some of them worshiped and some of them doubted. Full context, this is after the resurrection. This is after Jesus has shown up in various ways. This is after Jesus has allowed Thomas to put his hands in his wounds. Like, there is plenty of reason to be like, oh yeah, you are who you say you are. And the 11 who have walked with him most closely, it says that some of them worshiped, which is what you would expect. And some of them doubted. At this point, if you watch The Chosen, you're like, that's something that Matthew would write. Because why not leave that part out? Like, why do I need to know that some people were struggling with their doubts and their insecurities? Why do I need to know that some people were in this moment that should have been this holy reminder of, man, God is faithful and his presence has shown up and he did through Jesus what he said he was going to do? Like, why would anybody doubt in the moment? And if you did doubt in that moment, why would you tell anybody? And to think of the kindness of God, that he didn't say, well, okay, let me speak to the 4 of you who are worshiping right now. Here's my plan. And for the other 7 of you, go work on your game. But he says to all of them that this is what I'm doing, that I'm empowering you to go into all the world and make disciples and teach in the name of the Father and baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And not only that, I know that you're doubting about me being with you right now, but I promise you I'm going to be with you always. Like there's space for, amongst the people of God, honest confession of our disappointment and doubt that yes, you saying that you want to renew things, but I don't know how you're going to do that. I've not seen you do it. It's been too long. It's hurt too bad. I've prayed too much and you've not worked in this way. They are too far gone or the disease is too settled in. It doesn't seem like you're working in this way. I'm struggling with my doubts right now, Lord, but I'm still showing up. Will you? Yeah. To be able to say, you cannot fail us. You've made some promises. Start in me. I just want to tell you, it does not start in thrones of influence. It starts in altars. And I'm asking the Lord, by the mercy of Jesus, let me answer the question that young lady from Aberdeen University was asking. There is still mercy of God left for us. And in view of that mercy, would we lay ourselves on the altar? Say, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to change, whatever you want to transform, whatever you want to correct, whatever you want to call out, change it in me. We do not get to the level of renewal that we're hoping for and talking about without that type of honesty before the Lord. And so I just want to invite you into it. I just want to give you a moment. I'm not going to make you come forward or call you out. I'm just going to give you some space with the Lord in silence for just a couple of minutes to ask the honest question. Lord, you're saying you want to renew some things. What does it cost? I grew up in a tradition where the altar wasn't just an idea, it was a place. Maybe that's your tradition and maybe that helps you to focus. And so I'll even give you permission if you need to get out of your seat and come to the front of the room. And come to this space which has been historically called the altar and say, okay, Lord, I know that there's mercy left for me. That's why I'm coming. But are my hands clean? Is my heart pure? Or maybe it's I'm coming to the altar and I'm laying down this level of disappointment and doubt because I've been doing the thing. I followed the rules. I followed the order of operations and I'm doing the program. I'm linking to the history, but you haven't shown up. What are we doing? Because you promised that you wouldn't fail us. I just want to give you space for just a couple of minutes to go before the Lord and to be honest with him. And so Jesus, this morning, this is where we must start. Not grasping for thrones, but resting at altars. With the staff this morning, I confessed I want it. I think of the man, I prayed this with them, I think of the man whose son needed to be delivered by you. And you asked him, does he believe? And his response was, I believe, but help my unbelief. Lord, I desire you to have all of us, to have all of me, but help my lack of desire. Help my fearfulness. Help my desire for comfort, my desire for safety, my idolatry of power. Help me. Help us. Lord, it feels like a holy moment where you've chosen to meet with us and say, I'm trying to construct something in the altar of your hearts that will bring the renewal that you've been asking me for. But you have to bring all of you, not just the sanitized, put together Sunday morning parts of you, but the broken, the confused, the trapped in cycles of sin part of you, the disappointed part of you that looks back and says, Lord, why didn't you intervene there? Why didn't you move? Why does it feel like you failed me? Why does it feel like I couldn't trust in you? They're like those parts of us too. Would you help us to to fully bring ourselves. And then, Lord, I want to thank you that we don't have a Peggy and a Christine Smith. We have a team of people who quietly, at various times, are hidden away in rooms, believing and begging for you to move amongst our people, that are calling out to you, that are asking you to move, that are asking you to fill our church with the next generation of leaders, that are asking you to break people free from the bondage of sin, from the bondage of addiction, from the heartache and the heaviness of broken relationships. They're begging you for that. Lord, would you grow that room? Would you have more people that are longing for that? Lord, would you clear in our schedules altar space to come before you? Whatever you want to do in this space. Whatever you want to do amongst this people. Because when we worship you first, we find the resolve to deal with the opposition. You reshape our expectations and you allow us to follow after what you want to accomplish. And so would you do that in us? Would you do that in me? I trust you for this and so much more, Jesus. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Amen.
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.